It was a warm Saturday morning when I decided to head out to my favorite peaceful spot by the lake, a little curve in the shoreline just behind the trees where the water's always calm and the view is perfect. I've been going there since I was a kid. It used to be my grandfather's property, and after he passed, it became mine. The land was quiet, peaceful, and untouched, just the way I liked it. I pulled up in my truck, parked beside the worn-out path, and started setting up my chair and cooler. I had my fishing rod, some snacks, and a cooler full of soda. I wasn't expecting anything eventful. Just a quiet day by the water. But of course, in an HOA neighborhood, peace isn't always guaranteed, especially when there's a Karen on patrol. I heard her before I saw her. "Excuse me? Excuse me." I turned my head slowly, already half expecting the confrontation. There she was, mid-50s, oversized sunglasses, sun hat, clutching a phone like it was a badge of authority. "You can't be here," she said, walking briskly toward me. "This is private lake property. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security." I gave her a confused look. "Ma'am, I think you're mistaken. This land, this section of the lake, it's mine. Been in my family for over 30 years. She scoffed, arms crossed. "Don't lie. This entire shoreline is HOA managed. I'm on the board. I know every property line in this area. You're not on the list. So unless you want me to call the police, I suggest you pack up." I paused. I didn't want a scene. But I also wasn't about to let someone kick me off my own land. "Look," I said, keeping calm. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I have the title at home. It shows this patch, right from that big oak tree to the dock, is in my name. Always has been." "Oh, really?" she said mockingly. "Then where is this so-called title? Because from where I'm standing, you're just some guy trespassing. And I'm not about to argue with someone breaking the rules." She pulled out her phone, already dialing. "I'm calling the HOA security. They'll be here in 5 minutes." I couldn't believe it. I wasn't being loud. I wasn't even fishing yet. I was literally sitting quietly on land I owned, and this woman had taken it upon herself to declare herself queen of the lake. "You can call whoever you want," I said calmly, standing up. "But you're going to look ridiculous when they find out this land isn't even under HOA jurisdiction." She stopped mid-dial. "Excuse me? You heard me. This part of the lake? It was sectioned off before the HOA even existed. My grandfather bought it before they ever broke ground for your subdivision. I've got the deed, and I've got survey maps if you want them." She blinked, confused for just a second. But then the arrogance came rushing back in. "I still want you off the property. Until you prove what you're saying, I'm going to treat this as a violation." I rolled my eyes. "Fine. I'll go get the documents. But you better be ready to apologize when I come back." She smirked. "We'll see about that." I left the lake, angrier than I'd felt in months. It wasn't just the fact that she tried to intimidate me, it was the smugness. The entitlement. The way she used her position on the HOA like a badge to bully people. And this wasn't the first time I'd heard about her either. My neighbor Mike had told me she once tried to fine him for leaving a kayak on the grass. Another neighbor got written up for planting a lemon tree that she claimed didn't match the community aesthetic. I got home, went straight to my old wooden file cabinet, and pulled out the documents. Title deed, check. County survey map, check. And just for extra firepower, I grabbed an old photo of my granddad standing next to a hand-painted sign that said, Carter's Cove, the name he gave the spot. By the time I got back to the lake, the HOA security truck was already parked at the top of the hill, and Karen was standing there like she was leading a military operation. "There he is," she said, pointing. "That's him. Told you he was squatting here." The security officer, a younger guy in his 20s, looked less than thrilled to be there. "Sir," he said politely, "she says this land belongs to the HOA and that you were refusing to leave." I opened the manila folder and handed over the documents. "Here's the title. Here's the county survey. This land was bought before this neighborhood was ever built. And here's a photo of my grandfather, who built the little dock you're standing on. The officer looked at the papers, then back at Karen. Ma'am, this appears to be correct. This parcel isn't in our HOA registry. It's private land. Karen's expression shifted. For the first time, she looked unsure. That can't be right, she stammered. We maintain this part of the lake. We've set landscapers here. Then you've been landscaping private property, I said, arms crossed. I didn't ask you to do that. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I could see the battle going on in her head, double down or back off. She wasn't the type to admit fault. Not easily. Well, she said finally, if that's true, then maybe the HOA needs to review our maps. The security guy handed the papers back. Sorry for the confusion, sir. No harm done, I said, though my blood was still boiling. But I'd like a formal apology from the HOA board for this harassment. Karen's lips tightened. She clearly didn't like that idea. You'll have to take that up with the board, she said coolly, before walking off toward her Lexus. I sat back down in my chair, victorious but unsettled. Because something told me this wasn't over. She didn't like losing. And something about the way she walked off, shoulders stiff and head high, made it clear. Karen wasn't done yet. I thought showing the deed and shutting her down would be the end of it. I figured Karen would grumble to herself, maybe gossip to a few board members, and eventually move on to harassing someone about mailbox colors or grass height. But I underestimated her. 3 days later, I got a letter. It was neatly folded, slid into my mailbox. No stamp, just hand-delivered. The envelope was crisp and bore the HOA's logo like it was some sort of government agency. I opened it thinking maybe it was an apology, or a clarification. Nope. It was a formal notice of a compliance review regarding my use of unregistered land bordering HOA recreational space. According to the letter, they were opening an investigation to determine whether my lakeside area was encroaching on shared community space, and whether my activities there violated community tranquility codes. I almost laughed. Community tranquility codes? They were making things up now. But then I saw something worse at the bottom. Until this matter is resolved, all use of the disputed area is suspended. So now the HOA was trying to ban me from my own land. I stormed down to the HOA office that afternoon. The building was tucked between the tennis courts and the community center, dressed up with flags and flowers to give it some fake official charm. Inside, Karen was there, of course, seated at a desk like she was running a courtroom. I assume you got our letter, she said without looking up. You mean the joke? I replied. Yeah. I got it. Now I want to know who gave you the authority to suspend me from my own land. We're simply following procedure, she said calmly. There's been confusion about property boundaries. We're reviewing everything for the good of the community. I dropped the title deed and the survey on the desk again. There is no confusion. It's my land. The county records say so. Unless you bought the county courthouse, nothing's changed. Karen kept her voice calm, but her eyes were sharp. Let's not make this hostile. The HOA has concerns. The board agrees it's best to limit access to the area until we get legal clarity. Legal clarity? I repeated. You had clarity 3 days ago. From your own security guy. She folded her hands. Then you shouldn't mind if we double-check? I leaned in, voice low. You're doing this because you got embarrassed. She didn't respond, but the way her jaw tightened told me I hit the mark. I left furious. It wasn't about property anymore. This was a power move. Karen couldn't handle losing in front of someone, especially someone who didn't back down. And now she was using the HOA as her personal weapon to take another swing at me. I called my attorney the next morning, not a big shot, just a local guy who helped me with the title transfer years ago. I explained the situation, and he chuckled. She's trying to challenge a recorded deed with HOA nonsense? That's a first. So what can we do? Well, he said. You could file a cease and desist against the HOA for harassment. Or we can send a letter reminding them that they have no jurisdiction over your parcel. Either way, they're going to lose, legally. I chose the letter route first. Kept it clean and professional. My attorney sent it to the HOA board, stating in plain legal language that any attempt to enforce HOA policies on land not governed by the HOA would be seen as overreach and harassment. He attached a copy of the property survey and the deed, and gave them 5 business days to retract the suspension, or face legal action. That's when things got weird. 2 days later, I noticed my trash bins had been knocked over. Could have been the wind, but they were across the driveway, lids missing. Then the following morning, I found a citation taped to my front door. Unapproved fencing materials, noted on my side gate, which hadn't changed in 6 years. And then, just to really drive the pettiness home, someone reported me for improperly stored recreational equipment. What was the equipment? A canoe. Sitting on my dock. Karen was coming at me from every angle now. And it wasn't just her. She'd clearly rallied a few other board members or sympathetic residents to start a campaign of low-level harassment. They couldn't touch my lake property, so now they were going after anything they could touch. But I wasn't about to fold. I grew up here. I'd seen HOA power trips before, but never one this personal. This wasn't just rule enforcement, it was revenge. And if Karen wanted to play that game, I was ready. I started documenting everything. Took photos, videos, timestamps. Every citation, every strange incident, every visit from a so-called inspector. I compiled it all into a file titled Karen vs. Reality. Then I got an idea. If Karen and the board wanted to pretend like they were still reviewing my land status, I'd give them something to really review. That weekend I invited half the neighborhood over. A lakeside cookout. Grills, hammocks, cornhole, the works. I didn't set a single foot over HOA lines, everything was on my land. I even put up little flags along the boundary lines just to make sure they couldn't claim otherwise. People came. Some brought their kids. Others brought coolers. Most of them had their own stories about Karen or the HOA, minor fines, surprise inspections, threats of fees. Turned out I wasn't the only one getting targeted. I was just the one who'd pushed back the loudest. And then, like clockwork, Karen showed up. From across the trees, I saw her Lexus crawl up the road and park just on the HOA's side. She didn't step foot on my land, but she stood there, watching, arms crossed, lips tight. The board president was with her now, an older guy named Don, who looked far less interested in a fight and far more tired of being dragged into one. I walked over to the edge of my property, beer in hand, title deed in my back pocket. "Evening," I said, all smiles. She didn't respond. Don cleared his throat. "Look, we received your attorney's letter. It's pretty clear now. The board will be retracting the review." "Oh, really?" I said, feigning surprise. "Guess the system works." Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "But," Don added carefully, "we do ask that events like this remain peaceful and don't spill over onto HOA property." "Of course," I nodded. "Unlike some people, I know where the lines are." That night I sat by the fire pit while the lake shimmered in the moonlight, thinking I'd finally won. But I should have known better. Because Karen, she wasn't finished yet. And what she did next changed everything. The party was a hit. Neighbors who barely spoke to each other were laughing together by the lake, sharing stories about HOA run-ins and finally feeling like they weren't alone. For once, the community actually felt like a community. I figured that cookout was the end of it. That after the legal letter and public humiliation, Karen would back off. But clearly, I didn't know her well enough. 2 mornings after the event, I got a knock on my door. Not a doorbell ring, a knock. That old-school, official kind of knock. I opened it to find 2 men in polos standing stiffly on my porch. One had a clipboard. The other had a serious expression that screamed bureaucracy. "Mr. Carter?" the clipboard guy asked. "Yeah?" We're from the County Zoning and Environmental Department. We received a report of unauthorized land development and possible shoreline disruption on your property. I blinked. What? Neighbor complaint, he said flatly. Claims you've disturbed a protected area of the lakefront, possibly violating local conservation ordinances. I let out a slow breath. You've got to be kidding me. They weren't. They asked to inspect the property, so I walked them down the path toward the lake, where my dock and fire pit stood just as they had for the past decade. Nothing was new except the flags I'd set up to mark the boundary lines. As they surveyed the land, measuring distances and snapping photos, I stood there thinking, she actually went there. She went above the HOA. She filed a fake environmental complaint. One of the inspectors raised an eyebrow. This dock looks old. It is, I said. Built by my grandfather 30 years ago. It's not in any protected wetlands zone. And the property was cleared long before the county even zoned this area. Do you have documentation for all this? Oh, I've got it ready, I said. Would you like to see a title deed, survey maps, and a photo of my granddad nailing the dock into place? The guy chuckled. Honestly, yeah. That'd help. I handed them copies from the same folder I'd carried to the HOA office. They took a few minutes, reviewed everything, then shrugged. Looks like everything checks out. We'll file this as a non-issue, but you might get a letter confirming the visit. As they left, one of them turned to me and said, We've had a lot of calls lately from this neighborhood. Someone's got time on their hands. I smiled, but my blood was boiling. Karen wasn't just pushing HOA rules now. She was trying to get the county involved, hoping something, anything, would stick. She wasn't attacking my land anymore. She was attacking me. That's when I decided to escalate things too, legally. I went back to my lawyer, this time with a folder full of everything: the citations, the environmental complaint, the suspension letter, and even a statement from one of my neighbors who heard Karen brag about getting him kicked off the lake once and for all. She's crossed the line, I told my lawyer. I want to file for harassment and abuse of process. And I want the HOA named too. He leaned back, nodding. We've got more than enough. Within a week, we sent a formal cease and desist to both Karen and the HOA board, this time outlining our intent to pursue legal action if the harassment didn't stop. And to make it official, we filed a civil claim in small claims court for damages related to harassment, stress, and unlawful interference with private property. That got their attention. The HOA held an emergency board meeting. And this time, I didn't hear it through the grapevine. I was invited. Not as a defendant. As a guest. I walked in that night to a room full of tense faces. Karen sat near the front, arms crossed tightly, her usual smugness replaced with something more strained. Don, the HOA president, opened the meeting. We're here tonight to resolve an ongoing dispute that has become bigger than it ever needed to be. He glanced at me. Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. Before we begin, the board would like to issue a formal apology for the actions taken against you without proper review. You were right to defend your ownership, and we recognize that the HOA has no authority over your lakeside property. I nodded slowly. Thank you. Took long enough. Karen shifted in her seat, clearly fuming. Don continued. We also want to note that personal grievances should never become HOA policy, and we will be reviewing the actions of board members who overstep their role. That's when Karen stood up. Excuse me, she said, voice sharp, but I was doing what I thought was in the best interest of the community. He was holding large gatherings by the water. People were drinking. There was loud music. Don cut her off. On his private property. But it affects all of us. People walk their dogs near there. What if someone gets hurt? What if the fire pit causes a fire? Then they'll deal with it like any private landowner would, Don said. But that doesn't give you or this board the right to enforce rules where they don't apply. Karen sat down hard, her cheeks flushed red. For the first time, she looked outnumbered. The board voted unanimously to close the investigation and officially retract all prior citations and actions taken against me. They also added a clause in their policy guidelines that reaffirmed the HOA's jurisdiction ends at the surveyed property line. But the final blow came when Don looked at Karen and said, "There will also be a vote next week to remove board members who have acted outside of their authority. You may want to prepare a statement." Karen didn't show up to the vote. She resigned the day before. Apparently, someone had also tipped off the local paper, and a small story ran in the weekend edition about overzealous HOA enforcement near the lake. Nothing huge, but enough to get people talking, and to let others in the neighborhood know they didn't have to put up with bullying. Since then, the lake's been quieter, but in a good way. People come by to relax. Neighbors wave when they walk past my place. I even helped one of the new families set up a picnic near the dock last weekend. As for Karen, her house went up for sale last month. Word is she's moving to another, private community, a few towns over. Hopefully this time, she learns the difference between community management and a personal vendetta. And me? I still have my chair, my fishing rod, and a clear view of the lake from my dock. Only now, the peace feels even sweeter, because I earned it.